What if one of the most consequential moves in modern technological history is unfolding right now, and almost no one is paying attention? What if, quietly and methodically, the world's second-largest economy has started pulling a lever that could realign the entire foundation of global power, not with armies or treaties, but with microchips? At first glance, it might just look like a number. A 10.9% drop in China's semiconductor imports, year over year. A blip, a statistical footnote. But step back, look again, and you'll see it for what it truly is. Not a data anomaly, but a signal flare. A calculated shift that could mark the beginning of a profound global transformation. Because this isn't just about China buying fewer chips, this is about China changing the game entirely. For months now, economists, tech analysts, and intelligence experts have been asking the same question. Why? Why has China, the world's biggest consumer of semiconductors, suddenly pulled back from international markets? Why has a country that once poured hundreds of billions into foreign chips seemingly reversed course? Is it just a temporary correction? An economic slowdown? Or is something much more deliberate taking place? Look closer and a different picture emerges, one of strategy, intention, and long-term vision. This isn't about market fluctuation. This is about technological sovereignty, about resilience, about control. And make no mistake, this affects everyone. Whether you're in tech or policy, finance or defense, what's happening right now in the semiconductor space will ripple outward into every sector of the global economy, every innovation cycle, every international negotiation. Because semiconductors aren't just parts. They are the modern world's oxygen. They power your smartphone, your laptop, your car, your planes, your hospitals, your satellites. They are embedded in weapon systems, run financial networks, and drive AI models that increasingly influence everything from medical breakthroughs to battlefield decisions. Whoever controls the chip supply controls the future. For decades, China has been dependent on foreign chips to fuel its rise. But that dependency has long been seen in Beijing as a critical vulnerability, one that needed to be eliminated. And now, after years of preparation, that elimination is beginning. It didn't happen overnight. It's the result of a vast, meticulously planned, state-backed strategy, one born out of the Made in China 2025 initiative, a doctrine that called for the country to wean itself off foreign technology and become self-sufficient in key industries, starting with semiconductors. And this wasn't just policy, it became national mission. The scale of investment was staggering. Tens of billions poured into homegrown chip startups, new fabrication plants, research hubs, and talent acquisition programs. The goal? Not just to compete with the likes of Intel, Nvidia, and TSMC, but to eventually outpace them. Still, what's unfolding now goes deeper than just building domestic capability. China's playbook includes something few foresaw, a quiet, sustained stockpiling of chips over the past few years. Like nations once stockpiled oil in anticipation of war or sanctions, China has built a strategic reserve of semiconductors, preparing not for peace, but for the turbulence ahead. So now, as imports fall, it might not be because China needs less. It could be because they already have enough. And with the foundation secured, the shift begins. Domestic Chinese chip makers, once seen as far behind, are rapidly catching up. In some areas, they're already producing competitive alternatives. In others, they're exploring next-generation designs, AI processors tailored for China's own platforms, quantum chips that push beyond classical limits, and architectures optimized for a future in which they won't just be users of technology, but authors of it. Suddenly, this is no longer about catching up to the West. It's about rewriting the rules. And if China crosses the threshold into full semiconductor independence, everything changes. No more supply chain dependency. No more economic choke points. No more vulnerability to US export bans or diplomatic pressure. Instead, China becomes the master of its own digital destiny, and possibly the architect of a new global tech standard. This is leverage, strategic asymmetric leverage, and it's already reshaping how power works in the 21st century. Meanwhile, the US and its allies have responded the only way they know how, with restrictions, export bans, licensing hurdles, sanctions on cutting-edge chip technology, AI processors, lithography tools. The objective is clear. Slow China down, maintain the West's lead, delay the inevitable. But here's the irony. Those very actions may have accelerated China's drive toward independence. Because pressure breeds urgency, and urgency breeds innovation. Inside China, that innovation engine is now operating at full throttle. Entire ecosystems are being built to bypass foreign constraints. Domestic fabs are being constructed at blistering speed. Chinese companies are hiring the world's best chip talent, offering unlimited funding and creative freedom. Engineers from Intel, TSMC, Samsung, they're not just switching jobs. They're transferring decades of irreplaceable knowledge and experience into China's new tech bloodstream. And what's emerging is not a clone of Silicon Valley. It's something different, purpose-built, focused, unencumbered by legacy systems or slow-moving institutions. China is not just trying to replicate the chips the world uses today. It's trying to invent the chips the world will need tomorrow. Chips for sovereign AI systems. Chips for decentralized computing. Chips for post-quantum security. Innovation, not imitation. This is not a catch-up race anymore. It's a divergence. Two parallel futures of technology developing on separate tracks. One Western, one Chinese. Each with its own standards, its own platforms, its own ecosystems. And the gap between them is widening, not narrowing. Behind the scenes, intelligence reports point to breakthroughs in China that once seemed implausible. New methods of chip design, alternate materials, and unorthodox approaches to manufacturing that bypass Western bottlenecks altogether. If even half of these are real, the implications are massive. Because this isn't just economics. It's geopolitics. It's digital warfare. It's a race for dominance in an era where control of information means control of everything. And the drop in chip imports? That was just the first move. So now the real question isn't if China achieves full semiconductor independence. The real question is when, and what happens to the global order the moment that line is crossed. Because when that day comes, the world won't just be watching the rise of a new tech power. It will be waking up in a world that plays by new rules, on a board China helped build, using chips it made, running code it controls. And in that world nothing will ever look the same again. While most of the world remains fixated on China's efforts to catch up in traditional semiconductor manufacturing, on its struggles to close the gap with Western giants like TSMC, Intel, and Samsung, a much more profound transformation is taking shape, almost invisibly. The spotlight has been shining on nanometer metrics, lithography machines, and chip yield percentages. But the real story, the one with the potential to reshape the global technological order, has been unfolding not in the open halls of mass production, but in the quiet, often classified, corners of research labs, pilot factories, and government-backed innovation hubs across China. Because China isn't merely trying to catch up. It's not just trying to replicate or locally produce existing semiconductor designs. What it's doing is far more ambitious and far more disruptive. Behind the scenes, China is investing staggering amounts of capital, resources, and political will into the development of a new class of semiconductors, built not on the silicon-based, transistor-driven architectures the world has come to rely on, but on radically different concepts that could, if successful, make today's most advanced chips look not just outdated, but obsolete. These include photonic chips, which transmit information using light rather than electrical signals, offering the promise of ultra-high-speed data transfer with dramatically lower power consumption. They include quantum processors that manipulate quantum states, like superposition and entanglement, to solve problems that would take classical supercomputers millions of years to compute. They even include experimental biointegrated circuits, designed to interface directly with organic systems, blurring the line between biological tissue and computational machinery. These technologies, once confined to academic journals and science fiction, are now moving into tangible prototypes. And they're not being developed as academic curiosities. They're being fast-tracked with a clear purpose. To establish China not as a participant in the global chip race, but as the driver of a new technological standard. One that doesn't follow the rules written by Western firms, but rewrites them altogether. If this strategic pivot succeeds, China would no longer be chasing the leaders. It would become the leader, by defining a new playing field, on its own terms. And the first signals of this shift are already visible. A 10.9% decline in China's chip imports might seem, at first glance, like a simple move towards supply chain localization. Perhaps a reaction to trade restrictions or a push for self-sufficiency. But look deeper, and a very different picture emerges. This decline isn't just about replacing foreign chips with domestic equivalents. It's about reducing reliance on the entire architecture of the current global chip ecosystem. It's about building something else entirely. And the pace at which this is happening is faster than most observers realize. Emerging intelligence, including satellite imagery of new industrial sites, detailed tracking of supply chain components, and leaked internal communications, points to the existence of a new category of semiconductor facilities inside China. These facilities, many officially designated as research centers, are, in reality, hosting early-stage production lines experimenting with fabrication methods that have no current counterpart in the Western semiconductor industry. These are not just new ways to manufacture chips. They are entirely new paradigms of computing, and their potential is staggering. Preliminary data suggests they could reduce manufacturing complexity, drive down costs, and push performance beyond anything today's silicon chips can achieve. Even more striking are internal timelines. Documents from within Chinese semiconductor firms and state-backed institutions suggest that this shift is not decades away. The target for commercialization is just 12 to 18 months from now. This is not a long-term research agenda. It's a short-term disruption plan, one aimed squarely at overturning the current global semiconductor hierarchy in real time. And it's not a frontal assault on existing technologies. It's something more dangerous, an attempt to bypass them entirely, to render them irrelevant by offering something newer, faster, cheaper, and more advanced. Which brings us back to those declining chip imports. It's not just a sign of reduced dependence. It's a clue that China may be preparing to abandon the current semiconductor standard altogether and replace it with one of its own creation. A standard designed, built, and controlled domestically, supported by its own ecosystems of designers, manufacturers, software developers, and consumers. If that happens, the global dynamics of the chip industry will not just shift, they will fracture. China wouldn't just be catching up. It would be pulling ahead by an entire technological generation. For the West, and particularly for companies that have built decades of dominance on the predictability and gradual evolution of chip architectures, this moment represents an existential threat. Businesses that have long led the global semiconductor race could find themselves blindsided by competitors deploying tools, materials, and concepts they didn't see coming. Investors would need to reassess everything: product development timelines, research budgets, risk models, and long-term strategic plans. Entire stock indices could shift. And beyond the markets, the ripple effects would begin to touch every industry reliant on digital infrastructure, which is to say, virtually all of them. And this isn't just about business. The geopolitical consequences are enormous. For years, Western powers, led by the United States, have leveraged their dominance in chip design and fabrication as a cornerstone of global influence. Control over semiconductor technology has translated into economic strength, military advantage, diplomatic leverage, and strategic autonomy. But if China manages to establish the next-generation architecture of global computing, and if other nations begin to adopt that architecture, the balance of technological power will tilt, perhaps irreversibly, eastward. The world might find itself no longer anchored to TSMC's foundries in Taiwan, or ASML's lithography systems in the Netherlands, or Intel's fabs in Arizona. Instead, it might revolve around a new constellation of Chinese firms and institutions that have been quietly preparing for this moment. This could lead to the fragmentation of the global technology landscape. No longer one interconnected semiconductor market, but two, or more, competing technological spheres. One led by the West, grounded in existing silicon architectures. The other led by China, powered by fundamentally different technologies. These wouldn't just be separate supply chains. They would be separate realities. Different standards. Different capabilities, different visions of what computing is and what it should be. Nations around the world, particularly those caught between these two poles, would face difficult and potentially irreversible choices. Align with one side and risk exclusion from the other. Try to remain neutral and risk falling behind in both. This could be the end of the unified global tech ecosystem as we know it. And that raises the most important question of all. Not whether this transformation is happening, because the evidence is already clear, but how the rest of the world will respond. Will Western governments finally move beyond reactive policy and commit to long-term, future-focused investment in next-generation computing technologies? Will they intensify restrictions on tech exports to slow China's momentum, or double down on partnerships to accelerate their own innovation? Will we see new global alliances form, not just for economic purposes, but as bulwarks against technological fragmentation and geopolitical instability? Or perhaps, despite the tensions, we may yet see collaborative models emerge. Frameworks for joint research, shared standards, and cooperative innovation. Because while competition is inevitable, isolation is not. And the risks of a fractured tech future are too great to ignore, not just economically, but socially, environmentally, and militarily. The recent drop in China's chip imports is not just a line in a spreadsheet. It's a signal, a warning, a flashing red light on the global dashboard of technology. It's telling us that the next era of computing is already being built. Not only differently, but elsewhere. And the world needs to decide how it wants to respond.